I would love to introduce Phil Harrington to you. I have two parts here, the boring part and then the kind of interesting part. Phil Harrington's BA in English Literature is from the George Washington University. It was enhanced by a semester in England near Stratford-upon-Avon. His MA in Religion and the Arts and his MDiv are both from the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. So here's the more interesting part. Phil admits that though his early career of teaching Shakespeare to high schoolers was quite short-lived, he has never been able to shake the bard from his attention. He can still be caught in a favorite pastime, quoting King Lear to cows in pastures. I'm just reading. He decided to lead this class because of a firm conviction that a summer without Shakespeare is not to be. There is no question.
Well, welcome to you here and at home. And thank you for dedicating part of your summer to exploring some bloody politics. I hope you gathered that this class is an introductory class, not just to Macbeth, but to Shakespeare. So if you're a novice to Shakespeare, if you left it in college or even in high school, don't sweat. This is going to be friendly for beginners. And hopefully not boring to those of you. I know we have at least two Shakespeare teachers here in the room, and that will be beneficial probably. But don't be daunted if somebody knows the answer to a question that you don't. Please also, when you talk about tragedy, you talk about character flaws. And one of my character flaws is forgetfulness. And I remembered to set up my laptop with the notes I needed to accompany the slides that I'd already sent in. I didn't bring it. I didn't actually bring my laptop. So I'm using somebody else's, Hannah's, who was kind enough to be absent this week. And it's new to me, and I'm trying to coordinate two different machines. But I think that we can make it work. As I said, again, this is a beginner-friendly class. And the other thing I hope you picked up is that I am presenting, or I'm leading this class, not as a Shakespeare or Macbeth teacher, but as a student, Macbeth student, a Shakespearean student. And I hope that puts you a little bit more at ease as well. At least don't expect me to know everything that I bring up. But my assumption is that you know Shakespeare already. You know more Shakespeare than you probably realize. For example, I'm not going to be quoting from any well-known speeches, but I'll just be quoting some expressions that are not automatically identified with the play, one of Shakespeare's 38 plays, but have come into common usage. I'm going to start it, and you finish it for me, okay? I could say that one of my problems here is that this screen is smaller than what I was used to. Well, maybe I can do something about that. There, that helps a bit. I can say that person has a heart of gold. Okay, that's Shakespeare. We're indebted to Shakespeare for that. If a gathering is kind of not getting off the ground, you might say, we need something to break that's Shakespeare. If I'm waiting with bated, that's Shakespeare. We have seen better. See, you know Shakespeare. Okay, here's a tougher one. The better part of valor is discretion. Okay, all right, good. The better part of valor is discretion. If I'm very, very self-confident, I'll say, I'll not budge, and that's Shakespeare. How about this? I must be cruel only to be kind. Right? He ate me out of house and, where did we get that expression? William Shakespeare. For goodness, easy one, Shakespeare again. I could say, well, that's a foregone. Shakespeare is the first to use that phrase. We've come full circle. In my heart of hearts. You're quoting Shakespeare whenever you say that. Or I wear my heart on my sleeve. The marriage of true minds. There you go. The marriage of true minds. There's a method in the madness. You're quoting Shakespeare if you ever use that. Here's a more difficult one. He was a person more sinned against than sinning. Okay? Neither a borrower nor a lender be. Once more into the breach. Okay? Or we can take care of this in one fell swoop. Parting is such sweet pomp and circumstance. Neither rhyme nor or this one's difficult because I'll just skip it. Short shrift, making short shrift of something. This is also Shakespeare. That smells too high heaven. Something wicked this way. Oh, I was supposed to save that one for later. Sorry. Some such stuff as dreams are made on. We've changed some of these. So, but the Shakespeare's original was made on. Such stuff as dreams are made on. To thine own self be true. Okay. Too much of a good, or don't be led on a wild goose chase. Okay. See, I told you knew more Shakespeare. I even think that you might know more Macbeth than you think. Okay. Let's see. Don't do them all at once. We'll do them together. This blow might the be all and the end all. Double, double, toil and trouble. Knock, knock. Who's there? Believe it or not, it's very likely, some people strongly believe this, that's the origin. Macbeth is the origin of the knock knock jokes. Okay. The milk of human kindness. And here's that one fell swoop. Okay. Out damned spot, right. Out damned spot, out, I say. We've changed that one a little bit too. But, and there's something wicked this way comes. We already did that. This is a sorry state of affairs could be one thing, but that's not Shakespeare. This is a sorry sight, right? Okay. What's done is done. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving of it. Okay. That's another more difficult one, but it didn't phase you. Okay. Now we also have a lot of words that we are indebted to Shakespeare for, that we use, some of them not very often. But There are at least 1,700. I heard recently on the radio somebody, I think could have been a scientist, but he was kind of bragging the fact that he started a word, he coined a word that ended up finally in the dictionary. And he just thought that was a life achievement. Shakespeare can be credited with at least 1,700 words that he coined that have come into common usage. There are other estimates up to, I've heard 3,000, but it all depends on what you count, whether he just changed a word slightly, or whether we know that he wasn't the first one to use it, but he was the first one to put it in print, but at any rate, there are a couple thousand words, safe to say, that we would not be using if it were not for Shakespeare, because he used them, in most cases, the first person to use them. We use them. And you see some of them here. I did a smattering of them. And some of them might be kind of surprising to you that they were not used before Shakespeare used them. But you can see that some of them are formed by just combining two words together, lackluster, or putting a suffix on, or a prefix on. And are we getting down to the bottom? Yeah, I think that this screen is not printing the whole bottom there, but the bottom words are watchdog, well-behaved, well-bred, and my favorite, zany. I didn't know that was a Shakespearean word. And some of these too, he didn't even change the word, but he changed their usage. So he would use a verb as a noun, or as a noun as a verb for the first time, and it would catch on and it would stick. And we do that still. I mean, that's a very common thing. We do that all the time, kind of spontaneously, and some of them stick and some of them don't. I was going to use an example of that, the fact that social media has gotten us to use words differently. Like, we can now friend somebody as a verb, or unfriend them. Okay, I was going to use that as an example, and then just this morning, I discovered that Shakespeare beat us to it. He was the first to use friend as a verb, as far as we know, and unfriend as well, both in the play Twelfth Night. So Facebook is not as novel as anything. I want to talk about two words that we find in Macbeth, just as illustrations of why we ought to be so grateful for Shakespeare expanding our language like this. And he is the single most person to affect our language, the English language. But in scene 2 of Act 2, he uses the word multitudinous for the first time. And apparently enough people liked it. But I like being able to say a word like I don't know about you. Some people say, keep it simple. A third grader should be able to understand you, So say something with many parts to it, or something expansive, and multitudinous is just a lot more fun. This shows up when after Lady Macbeth says that they've done the murder, and Lady Macbeth says, a little water will cleanse this deed from us, and when she's gone, Macbeth ruminates to himself, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood? Clean this blood from my hand? No, This my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine. Um, and incarnadine is another great word that we don't use all that often. And if we want to be simple, we could say make it red, you know, but I like being able to have a word like incarnadine. I'm showing my bias here as one who was taught to speak as if someone had a third grade education. I like to, even in sermons, throw in words that I will then define, you know, go on like incarnadine or make red. I don't use incarnadine in a sermon, but other words, I'll make sure to say them again a different way. But I don't like this idea of our language being reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced to fewer and fewer words. I'm a rebel against that. And that's one reason to study Shakespeare every summer. The other word is assassination. For a long time, the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the authority, the authority in our language. I don't have one, so I can't bring one to check things, but it used to credit Macbeth's play Macbeth with the first usage in print of the word assassination. Recently, earlier, at least one in somebody's letter, use of the word shows up. Macbeth talks about it when he's contemplating whether to carry out the murder. And the reason I bring it up is because the word has changed since Macbeth used it in Elizabethan times from what we use. We see it as a straightforward noun. It means to kill somebody, and usually somebody in a high place. But when Shakespeare used it, it was not understood that way. In Shakespeare's time, it was not a common noun. It was a metaphor. Apparently what happened was when the English were off fighting in the Crusades and things like that, they come across a group of people, I think called the Assas, or they heard it as Assas, or plural would be assassin. And so they were known for being very vicious in their killing. And so assassin became kind of used as a picturesque way of describing a vicious vicious killer. And so by using a noun form of that, Shakespeare was using a metaphor. Like we could say, well, he pulled a mafia number on that guy, you know, and we know what is meant, but that's a metaphor because we associate certain things with the mafia, or too bad about so-and-so, he got cartelled. You know, if I said that, you would know what I would mean, but these pictures come into your mind, you know. And that's what Shakespeare is interested in doing. He wasn't because Macbeth is still skirting the issue. Up until this line, he refers to it as just it, you know. He's afraid to name the deed that he's contemplating. And so he's still kind of skirting the issue with a metaphor. I want to do several things with Shakespeare now. And one is just recognizing who he is. We use the word genius with him, and some people claim that actually it was because of Shakespeare that we started talking about genius in that way, as a person who was particularly gifted in one way or another, because we had to deal with this character, this body of work that he had created. And so I freely use the word genius with William Shakespeare. I have no trouble with that at all. When I was an undergraduate, one of my English literature teachers said, and he was from England, he said, there comes a time, this may be true of English students and more so than American students or teachers, He said, there comes a time when the light goes on and it suddenly dawns on you how great this writer was. It dawns on you. You can be convinced, you become convinced. It's something internal. It's like maybe a religious experience where you realize that there is Shakespeare and then there's everybody else, that he stands apart. And so there aren't too many people who will create arguments against that concept of lifting Shakespeare to some kind of pedestal. So what do we mean when we call Shakespeare a genius? I think one sense we have to look at is the way he was a genius dramatist. He not only understood what the Greeks were up to in their creation of dramatic models, but he was confident enough to disregard some of those rules to create his own forms. He had other influences like the morality plays and things that were going on in his day that he would have been exposed to. And so he had the ability to not only combine these influences, but really sense what is going to work on stage, what is going to come across, what is going to bind an audience to what you're doing on stage, that whole dramatic arc thing, and the development of characters. Then he was also a genius with his use of words, his use of the language, his creative use of the language, as a poet. His imagination, his creative imagination is stunning. If you like puns, you will like Shakespeare, and you will appreciate the ability that he has to describe something with words that are ambiguous intentionally, so that you won't just have one picture in your mind, one idea in your mind, but you'll see, well, there are two sides to this. On one hand, this, on one hand, that. To know when and how to do that took quite a mind. And I like alliteration a lot, and so you will like that, and you will find yourself reading some lines out loud just in order to be able to say that, the repetition of consonants or vowels. And then he's considered the all-round master of blank verse, which is poetry that does not need to rhyme on the end of a line, but is marked by having regular 5 beats or 5 measures per line. That's the pentameter part, 5 meters. And the iambic is the type of meter, type of foot, and it's one of the simplest and most common in English, unaccented followed by accented, da-dum, 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 da-dum. Okay, that's a line. And whether it was so common before Shakespeare or not, at least it is after. You will find it in the King James Bible a lot because of that. Anyway, and there are reasons, we'll get into it a little bit later. There are reasons why play in iambic pentameter. It is not, he will break from it from time to time. So it's not constant, but he usually has a reason for when he's speaking in iambic pentameter and when not. But you'll begin to, I think, appreciate it. And then I think that we also have got to see that he was a great and unusual and astute perceiver of humanity. And he could sympathize with a broad range of people and situations. The critic Harold Bloom said that Shakespeare invented human nature. And by that, he didn't mean that he created it out of nothing, that there wasn't human nature before Shakespeare came along, but that more than anybody else, Shakespeare had the ability to see, to perceive how we did things, what our nature was, and depict that in language for a stage. And so that it was like a mirror being presented to us. And we came to understand human nature in a way that we didn't because of Shakespeare's plays. And he could create characters across the social spectrum. He could create vivid and true, recognizable characters of royalty and other upperclassmen, even though he was not one. And he could also do the same for people who lived on the street, your common person. And you found that whole social range in the audiences of Shakespeare plays in his own day. So everybody could feel that they were being represented honestly. And maybe it's that same gift that caused his contemporary, one of his contemporaries, Ben Jonson, to say he was not of an age, but for all time. So that same vision he had saw into the depths of human nature that wasn't just dependent upon the Elizabethan era. Identifying Shakespeare is another matter. We know that he was born on the 26th of April in 1564. He was baptized. Thank you. We know that he was baptized on the 26th in Stratford, England. And from that, we are pretty safe in assuming that he was born on the 23rd of April. That was pretty much the normal wait period between a birth and a baptism. He was the son of a, say, Glover or Glover, a Glover. He made gloves. His father made gloves, John Shakespeare. Among other things, that also meant he had to know how to tan hides and things like that. But he also held offices, pretty high offices in Stratford, political offices. We know that he married Anne Hathaway in 1582 and had 3 children. And then he moved out and went to London. We don't know exactly how or exactly when, but it was in the late 1580s. He became an actor and a playwright fairly soon. And not only that, but eventually became a company shareholder, early in his career. And that's what really helped him survive, because that's where you gained any kind of money from a life in the theater, is by owning a share in the company that produced the plays. Somewhere between 1592 or 1903, with several successful plays, he turned to poetry. And that's when he started writing other things like, he has a couple long poems of Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucretia. But he also started writing his sonnets, and his patron who supported that work. Every poet needed a patron, was the Earl of Southampton. In 1594, and it was during that time that there was a plague that shut down the theaters. That's what caused him to branch out a bit. 1594, theaters opened up, and he became a member of the King's Men, one of the top theater companies of the day. We know that he continued writing and earning money because in 1597, he bought a very large house in Stratford for his family. And he retired there not until 1610, and then died probably on the anniversary of his birth, on the 23rd of April in 1616. And that's it. Somebody said that you could place all the things we know for sure like that about Shakespeare on an index card. And if you took and collected every book that's been written about Shakespeare, it would take one of those larger semi-moving vans. That may be an exaggeration, but it does give us another reminder of the fact that there's something special about this man. When that can happen, when so much can be said, when so many people can know him, even people outside the English language. Julius K. Nyerere, he was the first president of Tanzania, before then Tanganyika, before it united with Zanzibar. I forget which country, which group they came together to create Tanzania. But he not only led his country into existence, into independence, and was president for several years, he also translated several plays into Swahili. So it's not just the people who speak English who have recognized this gifted man. There's something about him. When that happens, when we only know a little bit about him, something special is going on. This mystery, it creates a mystery around Shakespeare that I find interesting, and probably is part of his appeal, that we don't know a lot of things for certain, so we can imagine. This mystery around Shakespeare, however, has also allowed the ability to doubt Shakespeare. Not doubt that he existed, but doubt that he wrote the plays that are attributed to him. For example, there at least a couple hundred years ago, there became a group of people known as the Baconians, who felt that Francis Bacon was responsible for the works of Shakespeare. They became known as the Baconians. And then the Marlovians came to believe that Christopher Marlowe, also writing plays and poetry at the same time as Shakespeare, was the one responsible for the plays. So they became known as the Marlovians. And then those who believed that the Earl of Oxford was responsible for Shakespeare's work became known as the Oxfordians. And there are others and other theories, but together they are known as the Anti-Stratfordians. In other words, they believe strongly that this man, the son of this Glover, who never went to college, did not write all of these works, but somebody else did. Now, if you have ever heard any of those theories or have had any questions, I am here to assert that it's bunk. The vast majority of scholars are very certain that William Shakespeare wrote William Shakespeare. And because if we doubt that, then we have to doubt all these other writers for whom we know even less. Some of them we even know less, but we take them for granted, and maybe even Francis Bacon himself. I'm not sure. There is enough that we can believe on the firm conviction. And all these other theories have more holes and weaknesses than the theory that William Shakespeare wrote William Shakespeare. So as Jonathan Bate says, the only mystery about Shakespeare's identity is why there's any mystery about Shakespeare's identity. And that it's caught on, and it's kind of clever. It's true, but it's also a bit misleading because in a sense there is mystery about his identity. There are things about him we don't know. We don't know why he didn't live with his family. What was up with his marriage? People speculate. Books have been written. Hamnet recently I found a very interesting book. Makes one speculation about Anne Hathaway. but we don't, we don't know for sure. There are other things that are nicely, I think, mysterious. William Shakespeare did not promote himself in that way. He did not. Ben Jonson did. Not everybody did. Ben Jonson wrote a lot about himself. Shakespeare did not. He was content being a bit mysterious or unknown to the general population. The other things misleading about this is that the idea that there's a mystery about why there's a mystery. Well, we know some reasons. The Baconians, that theory was started by a relative of Francis Bacon, but the others, the thing they have in common is that the people they propose are people of the upper class and are well educated. It gets very suspicious that people just don't want to accept that someone who didn't go up the ranks, somebody who wasn't university trained, could accomplish what William Shakespeare did. Jonathan Greenblatt, in his book Will in the World, gives us a reason to believe, to see. He speculates a lot on William Shakespeare's life, but he at least helps us to see how somebody with Shakespeare's experience, as it was, going to the limited amount of school he did, was still able to pick up on all these things, the Greek classics, for example, in the Latin language, the morality plays and the other dramas that were going on, and the life experience that allowed him to write the plays that he did. If you are curious more about, that's all we're going to touch on it. But if you are curious further, here are some of the books that I came across that I think are pretty solid, that are well respected. The leading biographer of Shakespeare is Samuel Schoenbaum. He wrote Shakespeare, A Documentary Life, and it's very thick, very long, and filled with a lot of notes and anecdotes and bases for why this could be. It's well documented. Okay, it's a well documented documentary. Fortunately, he put out a smaller book. I've seen it. It's only about this thick, called A Compact Documentary Life. Stephen Greenblatt, I mentioned, talks about what we do know about Shakespeare and what could be. He gets a little bit carried away, and he will acknowledge that he's speculating here, but then will go on to write about it as if it was really the way it was. So taking that in consideration, it's a worthwhile book to look at. Jack Lynch wrote a book, Becoming Shakespeare, which goes in the other direction. And rather than talking about Shakespeare's life over here, what might lead up to the plays, he starts after the plays and shows how Shakespeare became so well respected. It wasn't immediate, but it didn't take a while either. I mean, Shakespeare in his own day was respected. I mean, people admired his plays. They recognized that this was good stuff. But this character of genius did not happen overnight. A lot went into creating this aura around the man, and he kind of describes that, the afterlife of Shakespeare. And then these names are pretty well respected: Stanley Wells and Jonathan Bate, who I both read from, and met Stanley Wells when I was studying in England. I've never read Tiffany Stern, but I've heard good things about her work on Shakespeare as well. So it's not just good enough to investigate Shakespeare the person, we got to read him. So how do you go about reading Shakespeare? Elizabethan English is a foreign language to us. I'm sure if you've tried already, you're not expected to have tried to read Macbeth yet, but if you have for the first time, you will recognize that this is in many ways a foreign language. what makes it also difficult is that it was a flexible, Elizabethan was flexible English. And so Shakespeare felt very free to bend it, and he did. So, we get, for the sake of that iambic pentameter, we get some strange word orders sometime, or strange creative words, as you've already have learned. And so don't think that something's wrong with you. What I suggest is to give the text a chance. In other words, don't run off to Cliff Notes right away. Don't read a paraphrase yet. And don't demand complete comprehension. Don't worry about the fact that you're scratching your head. Notice what you can pick up, make a guess, and then keep going. If I get the gist of this page or this scene, I'm doing good. And then keep going, and you'll find that it gets a little bit easier as you go on. And also appreciate the beauty and simple complexity of the language. Some of the things that make it difficult, appreciate them. I say simple complexity because Shakespeare did not write in a highfalutin level of English. He wrote street level English. He was lucid. There's a word that starts with a P that I can never remember, I don't use. Perspicuous, something like that. That someone says identifies him perfectly, but I won't be scholarly in that. I won't demand that you remember that word. But he wrote. People off the street could understand his plays. It's not a complex language in that sense. And the beauty of it is something that makes it also difficult sometimes to understand. And give it a chance to win you over. What do I mean by beauty? And Act 5, Scene 2, and that's the way you designate. That's why we don't all need to have the same copy, because you can identify every line just by this method. The capital V stands for the fifth act. The smaller I's in Roman numerals, would be 2. And then if you want to identify the exact line, you'd put another period and then the Arabic number of the line. So, but this is Angus reporting to the arriving Scots and English troops that they've mustered, the help of which they've mustered, and they've come to Scotland to do something about Macbeth. And they say, "How's it going? What does it look like?" And Angus is reporting that things are bad, and that even Macbeth knows about it. And he says, this is the way he puts it: "Now does he feel his title hang loose about him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief." Now, all he meant, we could have said is, it's bad. Macbeth knows it. He's feeling uncomfortable in the predicament he's put himself in, But what's the fun of saying that? Being right to the point. So this creates some pictures in your head, which is what Shakespeare is trying to do. So give the text a chance, but also, and if you could, first of all, it'd be good, watch the play. They were written to be performed, not to be read in your armchair, but to be performed on stage. And when actors speak the same words that you were reading in your chair, they have a way of helping you understand exactly what it means. Not only cognitively, but through physically, through that body to body communication. So watching the play can help, preferably live in a theater, which is awesome. Or if not, then in a filmed version of a play. And then don't hesitate to consult dictionaries and commentaries. And most of your editions will have some of those words defined for you. Just don't get bogged down. Hopefully they won't tell you everything. And if you have your separate dictionary alongside you and keep going back and forth, it bogs you down, you know? So at least for your first reading, don't depend on those too much. You know, the minimum number of notes, you know, that you find, try to be sufficient, let those suffice. Underline things you want to look up later, you know. But getting too bogged down can be, I think, hazardous to your enjoyment of the play. And then speak the play. Like it was intended, and stage it in your imagination. You know, picture it going on. Say, if I were producing this play, this is how I do it. This would be my setting, you know. By speaking it aloud, you're allowing verse to do its work, poetry. Verse gives language the quality of music. Why just read notes on a page when you can sing them? Why just read a poem if it's been put to music? See what that feels like too. Studies have been done about this. Music and just rhythm itself, which iambic pentameter is, it puts you in connection with other people in ways that you're not even conscious of. It connects us not only with other people, but within the natural world. That rhythm of accented syllables and unaccented syllables can be found in nature. An anapest is a horse, da-da-dum, 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 you know, da-dum, the iamb is a heartbeat. And there are other ways in which the spoken word, particularly when it's designed the way Shakespeare's words are, does something in us. When we picture it in our minds, when we stage it, it makes us collaborators with Shakespeare, which I think is what he wants. And that helps us appreciate a whole lot more. When you read Macbeth, any edition is fine as long as it is Shakespeare's words. In other words, if it says abridged or paraphrased or summarized, you're not actually reading Shakespeare, which is okay. But for this class, you ought to be reading Shakespeare. Now, some editions have little summaries before a scene to let you know what you're going to encounter. That's fine. Don't worry about that. Just don't read a summary of the play instead of the play itself. It will get you somewhere, but it won't get you where we would like to go for this class. Some of the big names and editions are Arden, Folger, Norton, and Oxford. Arden being considered the top line, but it's also got a lot of notes. A lot of historical things about textual information, like this folio had this version of it, that folio had that version, more than what you need. Folger is from the Folger Shakespearean Library, which is an excellent way to understand Shakespeare. And Norton and Oxford, of course, are English publishers. But there are other good ones too. These are just the ones that come to my mind. Recognize that you're reading tragedy. And that means that someone's going to die. It means specifically that the protagonist, you know, there may be tragedies out there where the protagonist doesn't die. Tragedies usually always involve death, I think. And at least in Shakespeare, it always involves the death of the protagonist. And that's, Shakespeare did not have phases where he just stuck to one form or not. He started basically with comedies and histories, and then added tragedies. I think Romeo and Juliet was his first tragedy, fairly early, and then I think Hamlet was the second, and Macbeth was a little bit later than that, about the same time as King Lear. But he always intermixed them. He kept writing comedies and wrote histories right from the start. I think his first play was a history. I'm not sure. But he wrote histories throughout. Toward the end of his life, he tried to merge tragedy and comedy in a way that we call romances sometime. And, you know, I think venturing out into new territory, I like those, but that's not what we're reading here. We're reading a tragedy. What's unique about our tragedy is that the protagonists are the villains. It's not like King Lear. It's not like Hamlet. It's the person that we are supposed to feel some affinity for that is also the villain. That makes it a little bit different. Usually we see it either through an outside evil or a character flaw. We see the protagonist dealing with a problem, and it may not end all that well, but the character, like Lear, grows through the process of dealing with that outside situation, maybe enhanced by an interior character flaw. But Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are, it's not that they have a flaw in their good character. It's more, as somebody said it, they have flaws in their bad character, or at least Macbeth does, you know, because he has a conscience at the beginning of the play. And that creates the little question mark of where is this going to go? When that gets bridged, you know, that when that conscience gets overtaken, then Macbeth transforms, but not in a good, positive way like Lear, but in a negative way. And so what we are doing, we are watching not good people suffer because of bad people. We are watching bad people bring upon self-destruction. And we are given a front row seat to that decline in character, to that turmoil inside of what's going on. Shakespeare somehow, he doesn't have to make us like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, but somehow has to get us to feel something about them in order to stick with him through the play. It's a unique challenge put in front of us. And one of the things that helps is that he creates Macbeth with so much imagination. Some people say that Macbeth is the most imagination-full character in all of Shakespeare. And we see it from the inside. His soliloquies are not speeches. You know, Richard III was another bad character, and he would tell the audience pretty much straightforward, like I'm speaking to you. Richard III would tell the audience what he wanted them to know. Macbeth doesn't do that. Macbeth doesn't talk to anybody. We are let inside his mind. It's working, and he doesn't always know where his mind is going when he starts. And it's amazing. It's amazing to watch what goes on. If we have time, and I can't see what 5 till 2, we don't have time. But there's a good passage there. Maybe I'll pick it up next time from someone early on in 1769 who recognized that and called it Shakespeare's genius, the way he lets us into Macbeth's mind. You should know that the play is loosely based on Scottish historical record, but it's not. He doesn't stick to the history perfectly. It's highly affected by recent political events, particularly the gunpowder plot. So if you know your English history, recall that, because that affects this play. Shakespeare addresses that directly, like a lot of plays in Shakespeare's this same time did. It was a major event in English history, where the attempted overthrow of the monarchy and Parliament itself And we can talk about that little bit later when we talk about the drunken porter scene, which is particularly given to that. And it was written to be performed for King James. We think it was actually performed before 1606, at least once. But we know that in 1606, it was King James sat in front of the players as they played, and they played kind of right to him. And so, for example, Banquo was James' ancestor. And so what Shakespeare has done is rewritten Banquo from one of Macbeth's co-conspirators and partners in crime. He creates Banquo as a good character for the sake of his audience. Right. Any questions to this point? Yeah, okay, good. Yep, you need the mic.
I have found if sometimes if there's the passage I couldn't figure out, hearing the actors say it makes it much clearer.
Yeah.
It really does.
Mhm. Yep. Even actors that aren't as great as others will help you somewhat. Right. Mhm.
I really appreciate the ability to be able to read it, because I have to go back and read things over and again several times. If I'm sitting in a play, I can't make them stop. It just goes on further and further, and I get further and more confused. I prefer reading plays, I guess.
I think Shakespeare will put up with you. We'll hope. Okay. I do want to get to what I mean by finding a theme in Macbeth. And I almost feel guilty for presenting the theme for you, because really at least your first time reading should be just free, without having to think about anything. So don't worry too much about it when we get to my theme, my theme that I want to talk about next week. There's a lot in there that you could develop an opinion about. Evil, the whole subject of evil. Is this a play about evil in the form of malice, malicious people by nature, or is this more of evil as ambition or greed? Where do you find the remorse for evil in the play, if at all? This is a play about fate and free will. You can start thinking about that. This was early Reformation, when free will got thrown into the equation, and not only fate, predestination got thrown into the equation of theological thinking. So fate and free will, and in Macbeth, they're closely identified with witchcraft, which could stand as a theme all by itself. So if you're really interested in the various forms of witchcraft, consider the witches. What are they all about in this play? Equivocation is automatically a theme in Macbeth. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Things not being exactly as they appear or are stated to be. And the word equivocation is one that ties us to the gunpowder plot. And it comes up in the drunken porter playing explicitly, the word equivocation. Gender or marriage are rich themes in there. Wow, I see that we're mostly women here. You may not like Lady Macbeth's definition of manhood by the time you read this. But that the marriage between them is very, very interesting. It's been called Shakespeare's most functional marriage in his plays. Most functional in the sense that there's a complementariness there. They really do belong to each other, and they love each other and are committed to each other. No other marriage in Shakespeare is that confident. I mean, you have reason to doubt whether it's going to work. Every other marriage in Shakespeare, you really have some questions about it. This one worked. Why is that? That's a good thing. And then time, people often bring up, because time is mentioned throughout the play. There are a lot of ways you could look at time in Macbeth. For example, just the difference between day and night in the play might be very illuminating. Just know also that when you're looking at time, the word time gets used sometimes in Macbeth, like the era, for meaning a milieu or the circumstances around an event, maybe sometimes even the people. So when Lady Macbeth says to beguile the time, act like the time, she's meaning copy everybody else. Okay, if you want to fool them, if you want to disguise yourself, what you're really thinking, doing, act the way everybody else is. So not every reference to time will be what we're going for next week. I'm talking about particularly the perception of time. In other words, we say that, boy, time flew, or time is dragging on. We can measure with a variety of clocks or calendars, but then there's also our sense of how long. I just got back from 4 weeks being away from home. My sense of time was altered. But I primarily mean a matter of order and the nature of things. Time as part of the order of the world. The Elizabethans were big on order. Order was it. Everything had to have an order, to be in order, politically and socially. There was an order that you couldn't step. You were born into a rank in that era in England. You belonged to a class and you had to act within that class, and you couldn't pretend to be somebody else, or you got in serious trouble. And you couldn't, if you were of lower. The king was the order of God, placed on the throne by God. So killing a king was a tremendous breach of order. Okay, so that's our biggest breach of order in Macbeth. I want to suggest that there's also a breach in the order of time. Pay attention to how people talk about the past, the present, and the future. That will enter into a bit, but particularly aging. What are the ages of characters, and how does that make a difference? And I want to even talk about how old people perceive themselves to be in Macbeth. This comes again late, the third scene, beginning on line 26 of the fifth act. This is Macbeth. I have lived long enough, again, a soliloquy, so he's talking to himself. I have lived long enough. My way of life has fallen into the sear, has withered, dried up. My life has fallen into the sear, the yellow leaf, and that which should accompany old age, as honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, I must not look to have, but in their stead, curses, not loud, but deep, mouth honor, breath, which the poor heart would fain deny, and dare not. Macbeth is perceiving himself to be an old man here, the end of his life. I've lived long enough. The yellow leaf, the autumn of his life. And yet at the beginning of the play, he's not. He's a fairly young man. He doesn't have kids yet, but is anticipating having kids. And there's some other time references that might help you discern Macbeth's age at the beginning of the play, but he's definitely not an old man. He's at the beginning of his career, not the end of it. Now, in the real history, Macbeth reigned as king for 17 years. In the play Macbeth, it can't be any more than 17 weeks from the beginning to the end, from young man to old man. Okay. In fact, most people who read it would get the impression of it's just a few weeks at most that all this takes place in. How does Macbeth get to be an old man? That's the question I want to address next week. To let you know that that aging was something that Shakespeare, as a poet, as a writer, thought about often. I want to look at briefly, a little bit briefly, the 73rd sonnet, or then when his sonnets did get published, it ended up with the number 73. You'll recognize the word. You'll know why this came to my mind. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold. There ruined choirs, where late the sweet bird sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such a day, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. Okay. What Shakespeare is expressing here is that boy, oh, there we go. Okay, it's blanking out. Carpe diem, seize the day, which I think you probably have heard of. It's been popular ever since Horace started to use it a lot, the Latin poet Horace. But in English literature, it was also big in the era, including Shakespeare's time and just before Shakespeare's time, the century before Shakespeare's time, to refer to the fact that time is passing and you got to take advantage of it when you can. Now, Shakespeare in Sonnet 73 is referring to, I'm not going to be around much longer, love me while you can, because I'm not here forever. But usually the same concept was put on the earlier part of life, youth. Youth is so fleeting. Youthful beauty disappears, very quickly. Appreciate what you can in youth while you do. And that's, it gets used in like Andrew Marvell's to his coy mistress. Coy mean a little bit reluctant, standoffish. And he uses that same kind of logic. But I don't want so much talk about Carpe Diem as I do want to go back to the beginning of this sonnet. Because it gives you a little bit of a clue, a little bit of forewarning, foreshadowing of what you're going to get into, the fun you're going to have with reading even the play Macbeth. That time of year which thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none or few, do hang upon the boughs which shake against the cold. What do you notice about that phrase, yellow leaves, or none, or few? What's that? Autumn time. But look at we have autumn leaves, then we have none, then we have a few. Is that order a little bit wrong? Different? Yeah. If you were a natural progression would be you have the autumn leaves, and then you only have a few, and then you have none, right? With the passage of time. But here we have yellow leaves, or none, or a few. He alters the order of that progression, as if we were there too, looking. We were looking at these trees that have lost most of their leaves, most of their yellow leaves. Look at that one has no leaves, and that one just has a few. So Shakespeare is putting us as the reader into the poem as an observer. We are there looking and notice, because that's the way we would notice in a random order the amount of leaves left on a tree. They do hang upon these boughs which shake against the cold. These branches of these trees, these wintry trees, are not just being tossed by the wind, they're shaking against the cold. The trees become the active partner in this view. They're the ones they are resisting this death. They're raging against the dying of the light, as Dylan Thomas would say. So he gives them an agency. The trees are not being passive, but active. Yeah. They're shivering. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Okay. And lastly, I want to look at the next line. Bare ruined choirs. What's that about? How do we get from trees to bare ruined choirs? You know what a bare ruined choir is? Yeah. Right? The birds flew away, the trees, yes. But what is the choir doing? Or what's bare and what's ruined? The trees aren't ruined. Okay. Let me put you back in the place of, you're suggesting good things about the birds being gone and whatever. But let me put you back in the place of the observer. If you're walking in rural England, and is that 10 after 2? Okay, I'm doing okay time-wise. You're walking in rural England, and what did you see besides trees in the countryside? That when you think of ruined? Churches. You find ruined churches, because a lot of churches that were built in England, and they don't all get used anymore. A lot of them have started to crumble. Okay, even in Shakespeare's day, a lot of churches were crumbling already. Now, in an old church, they were shaped like a cross often, and in the center, that was usually the tallest part of the building. The center is where the choir sat to sing or stood to sing. And so quite often that whole center section of the church building was referred to as a choir. Okay, I'll meet you in the choir. We don't say choir loft like we do today, but back then we say the choir. Okay, so that was the part that would usually be the most remnant of a crumbling church. The others would be low, and what would be sticking up there would be the choir. So we're not only looking at trees, we see this bare, ruined choir. So we could accuse Shakespeare of mixing metaphors, but it would be wrong, because that's not what he's doing here. Look what he's doing. Bare, ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. He's back to the trees. So he's not mixing metaphors, he's layering metaphors. Okay, old age is like a wintry tree with birds and leaves. Okay, and those wintry trees are like old church buildings where no more music is sung. You know, the choir is bare and ruined. So he's using a metaphor to describe a metaphor. And, you know, what a metaphor does, and this happens in common language, yours and mine, in our brain, is that when we go from one thing and make a link to another, there's a synaptical reaction. A synapse happens in our brain. Okay? So every time we have a metaphor, it's more fun for our brain. What Shakespeare is doing is allowing our synapses to leapfrog over each other. So there's a lot of fun going on in our brain with someone who can write the way Shakespeare does. So what else do I want to talk about? Oh, any other questions about a theme in Macbeth or anything really? I want to answer one, since you heard you react to it too when Doug introduced me. What did you quote to? I want to answer two questions. What did you quote to the cows? What do you quote to the cows? I still do it, you know. It depends on the weather. And it started when I was a student, when I had come from my semester in England and was traveling the continent. I was in the Netherlands, and my rail pass and bus could only take me so far where I was going. I was walking down this very rural road in the Netherlands, and it started to rain, you know, and so I get out that big sheet of plastic or whatever I had back then, some kind of coverall to put over my head and my backpack so I wouldn't get soaked. And as I was covering up, I noticed I was by a field, and those cows don't have raincoats to put on, or anything like that. And my mind immediately flashed back to King Lear when one of his speeches during the storm out on the hearth. And the cows had noticed me, but went right back to their grazing. And then when I started quoting Lear, they stared at me. I was quoting, "Poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides defend you from your looped and windowed raggedness, defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I've ta'en too little care of this. Take physic, pomp, expose yourself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayest shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just." They seem to appreciate it. And so I do it. I do it whenever the circumstances call for it. Not a lot recently, because I messed up on some of the words. But another question that maybe you should ask is, why focus on time? And this will be helpful for you, maybe, to let you know I'm not just putting you through your paces. I'm putting through your paces for my benefit partially. Why I chose, well, that'll come up later. When I started reading more about Macbeth recently, it's like I reckon listening to commentaries too. I find CDs like the Great Book Series. I found that there was a particular performance of Macbeth that seemed to stand out in a number of people's opinion as the performance, the production par excellence, the one that everything else would be compared to, that had achieved something that seldom gets achieved. And that is a performance by the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon. In 1976, the director was Trevor Nunn. Now, it took place in the Other Place Theater. There is a big theater in Stratford. I think now there are three, but in 1976, there was just one main theater that held a whole lot of people. And then they started doing some place in this place they called the Other Place. And they performed Macbeth there in the round so that the characters sat in a circle on the edge of the circle in the middle of the theater. And so only about 200, I forget what they said, at the most, 200, 220 people were in the audience. So it was an intimate situation. Whenever a character had a part, they would enter the circle from their bench, their stool along the side. The props were very simple. Costuming was fairly simple and didn't create any one particular era. But more a perception or a mood of the character. And the people playing Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were Sir Ian McKellen and Dame Judi Dench. Of course, at that time in 1976, they weren't a knight. They hadn't been knighted or made dame. I don't know what, you don't dame someone, I don't know. I don't know, but whatever. It was before they were even very famous. They were hardly known, except outside of, the few in the theatrical world. And this was the play that kind of put them on the map. That in 1976, for this role as Macbeth, Ian McKellen won the Players Award, which is the top British acting award. People speak of that performance, and someone did a televised version. They didn't recreate the play on the stage, but they did a version for the camera of that same production. And that is available. If you look under Macbeth and Ian McKellen and Judi Dench. Why I bring it up is that of those few people who are able to see that production in the Other Place, I'm happy to count myself in a member. When I hear these other people say, "Oh, I wish I could have seen that," I was there. That was the year that I was doing a semester in England in nearby Banbury, or outside of Banbury in Roxton, and was able not only, in fact, I saw the play twice, not only to see Ian McKellen and Dame Judi Dench act there, but both of those actors at different times came to our little school. There are 25 of us students, American students, exploring what British education was like. And both of the actors came and talked to us, spent time talking to us. So I had a chance not only to listen to Ian McKellen describe what it means to let a text of Shakespeare inhabit your body, to live with that, and to express that from who you are, and that merging of your identity and the character, and how those words that kind of stir us really affect you differently when you are becoming them. It was when he was describing that to us that the light went on for me, the genius of Shakespeare. And I even had the chance to thank Ian afterwards and ask a couple, more personal questions about his relationship to Shakespeare. And so that has stayed in my mind. I wrote a paper in my class, a Shakespeare class, on that production of Shakespeare, and came up with, I think, were some novel ideas. I can't come up with the paper. So my teaching this class is trying to recreate it and see how much of it still holds up and how much fits in with other people's have been talking in the 25, 45 years since 1976. You do the math. I can't. It was a long time ago, long before any of us knew of Gandalf or whoever else Macbeth have
Recently, I heard someone from the Hope College Theater Department talk about students who are participating in plays and afterwards need to deassociate themselves from the character they've been playing. Sometimes it's a profound psychological effect that comes over them, and they need to kind of debrief or decompress afterwards. And there's that kind of therapy for some of the actors and actresses in the plays. And that's found that interesting.
Yes, and there's something, when that happens, there's something that happens to the audience too. And I know they always, anytime there's new technology, we worry about the old ways disappearing. And I've been reassured by some folks that stage performances are not going to disappear. In New York, they're getting a whole lot more expensive. But I really want to be a part of a movement that makes sure that we still go to theaters, we still see literature being put on stage, and have that magic go on that you were describing, because I think something about us will be less human if we start getting all of our media from a screen, especially particularly a screen that we hold in our hands. We've become less human. Call me pessimistic or idealistic or not, I don't know, but that is my conviction, and my purpose in life is to work against that.
And I think it's important for people who are in elementary school, junior high, and high school to participate in plays. It's not professional or anything, but looking on my own experience, the only time I was ever in plays were juniors in high school and a senior in high school. And they were not literary plays, they were mediocre plays. But the experience of going from a shy, quiet girl into playing the part of a woman physician, a chiropractor, who had to perform a lot of body language, let's say, with a football star, or performing the part of somebody who had to stutter a lot. Those two things, getting out of myself and into another person, has prepared me for life.
Yeah.
I could pretend to be a teacher, a professor, And it's gotten me through a lot of experiences to think, well, I'm an actor now.
Right. And that goes for Shakespeare too. There are other plays that are we feel much closer to. But Ian McKellen has made a point. He goes around and works in elementary schools. He's made a point of stressing that you don't have to sound British to act Shakespeare. Shakespeare sounds just fine and works just as well in an American accent. Anyway, I think that do we still have a couple minutes left? Are there any other questions or comments? Was that a hand over here? Oh, okay. I couldn't quite tell. All right. Well, yes, there is one in back. Good.
There was a couple of instances where you talk to cows, you quote Shakespeare to cows.
Oh, many instances. Yes, but
What
that
kind-
was just the first one in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And I
thought
haven't
maybe
used
there were
any-
some
I-
non-rainy
yeah.
occasions,
Go ahead.
non-rainy occasions.
No, usually it's got to be a little bit of inclement weather to get me going.
Okay.
It could be just a little bit, but that provides the right stage for my performance. Thank you so much for your attention today, and have fun with Macbeth. Again, don't worry about not feeling on top of it. We'll try to make some sense of it next week, and bring your own experiences.